skewering an opponent is now a game and an exercise. And the best place to see it is in schools, fencing clubs, and the like. They tell me that the science of fencing has improved so much down the centuries that José de Capriles there, he's the man of fencing in the rear, could very comfortably take on D'Artagnan or Cyrano. José is the captain of the U.S. Olympic team. He's been on every team since 1932, and he's usually considered the best three-weapon man that the United States has ever produced. José, how you doing, Cook? Well, even though you've got a, don't you have a blunt on the end of this saber?
Yes, we do.
It still looks like dangerous work.
Well, it's hard work.
Well, at least nobody loses a life anymore, do they?
No, not quite. But you know, we have managed to retain the thrill of personal combat. And although most fencers won't admit it, there's a tremendous romantic appeal to this game. You see, the sword here, the saber, is a thin blade. It's not a child's plaything. But, although today we still follow the very polite rules of the game, it wasn't so long ago that it was kill or be killed. And a man would slash and he'd thrust as best he could, using fair means and sometimes foul means to do his opponent away. However, the sport itself is a very dynamic thing. We've got constant innovations. And through the centuries, the basic technique of attack and defense has been refined to such a point that a bout between two expert fencers today is a wonderful combat, mental and physical.
Well, would you like to take us through these refinements down the centuries and tell us when fencing began?
Well, I suppose you could say that when the first time two cavemen swung a club at each other. But I think that you could say that this sport started from the time of the invention of gunpowder. Gunpowder made heavy body armor obsolete. But the early firearm also had its drawback. It took too long to reload. The soldier still needed a sword. The heavy broadsword, designed for hacking through armor, was unwieldy and gave way to the lighter rapier and the parrying dagger. This became a highly developed form of combat in the 16th and 17th centuries. But at close quarters, standing pretty much as a modern boxer does, the man with the rapier and dagger offered a wide target to an opponent who stood sideways and wielded a light sword. The needle-pointed sword needed no cutting edge or parrying dagger to outmaneuver the man with the rapier and to skewer him with that slender steel shaft. This sort of thing happened all too often. In fact, Cardinal Richelieu finally outlawed the duel in France because in a single year, some 35,000 juvenile delinquents met their deaths at sword's point. And since inexperienced swordsmen rarely lived long enough to improve their technique, salle d'armes, or fencing schools, were established to teach the tricks of the duelist's trade. To avoid danger, the fencing foil, with its flexible blade and blunt point, was developed and has come down to us relatively unchanged to become the basic weapon in competitive fencing today. Although the time has now passed when a man's life might depend on his skill with a sword, we still retain many of the courtesies and traditions of swordsmanship as handed down to us from the past. For instance, here is the grand salute done for us by Olympic coach Panchart and his daughter Marietta. This ceremony was developed to give each fencer the opportunity to measure his opponent's depth of lunge and general technique. It became a highly formalized ritual, and until very recently, it preceded every important fencing match. Another great tradition is that of the Master of Arms, who frequently is a descendant of many generations of fencing masters. Giorgio Santelli, whom we see here, and his father before him, have developed many champions, both in the United States and Italy and Hungary. This is the foil. The target is limited to the torso from the shoulders to the pelvic bone. As you can see, footwork plays quite an important role on the attack. It takes a long time and a lot of practice to get the feet coordinated with the movements of the blade. The basic maneuvers of attack are the thrust. That's an extension of the arm, you see. Then the disengage, which is thrusting after feinting on one side and coming to the other. And the beat thrust. You beat your opponent's blade out of the way and then make your thrust. Each of these is followed by a lunge. The variations of attack are infinite, but all of them involve these basic movements. The limited target compels extreme precision in the attack, but makes the defense that much simpler, if you know how, of course. For each offensive movement, there's a defensive move which we call a parry. It's a blocking maneuver. There's a thrust and a parry. The thrust, parry. A thrust and a parry. Now we have 4 basic parries in foil corresponding to the sections of the target. Against the thrust in the upper left, it's parried out. And a thrust in the upper right, parried on the other side. On the lower left and the lower right. From each of these, a fencer should be in a position to make a riposte. Now, let's look at some parrying in slow motion. Now, this is what we call the conversation of blades. The one on the offense says, "I have the right of way." And the defender, when successful, says, "Not quite so fast, young fella." Then the first recovers. Here's the parry, and here's the riposte. Another weapon used in fencing is the épée. Its blade is much stiffer, and the belt guard is larger than the foil. It's a direct descendant of the old dueling sword. The rules for épée fencing come closer to the duel than do those of foil. In this weapon, the target is the entire body from the top of the head to the bottom of the feet. And actually, most touches are scored on the arm because it's easier to reach without exposing yourself too much. Here, Giorgio is going to fence Sewell Shurtz, our national épée champion.
Nice touch. Yes, good. Thank you. Good touch. Very nice.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. To me, the most exciting is the saber. And actually, it's the easiest to follow. The saber has a thin, flexible blade. Not at all like its predecessor, the old cavalry saber. This is heavy and cumbersome. Our blade, as you see, is light. The target in this weapon is the entire body above the hips. That's probably because they used to fence it on horseback originally. With the saber, there is a theoretical cutting edge along one side of the blade, so that touches are scored either with a cut or with a thrust. Now, in this weapon, it permits a much wider variety of play, much more ferocious, and there's a much more spectacular series of maneuvers.
Well, you take a lesson.
Yes, sir.
On guard. Head cut. Head again. Left. Very quick. Chest. Head. Then chest, head. These cut head. Allez. Head. Again. Head. Chest, head. Feet flat. Bravo. Head. Very fast. Chin. Allez. Again. Once more. Head. 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 Twin. Contact. Chin. Head. Again. Hey, fine. Good work, Joe.
Thank you, George. See what I mean? Now, some of this may have been a little fast for you to follow. We made a slow motion film of this sort of thing in the hopes of being able to give you an insight as to the excitement of the sport from the competitor's point of view. You know, there's a tremendous subjective exhilaration in the battle of wits whenever you cross blades with an opponent. It's very much like an athletic game of chess. Hey, la! Of course, in a fast bout, you can't stop to think. It's all a matter of reflex. However, with the slow motion camera, I may be able to slow down the thinking process for you and show you what might run through a fencer's mind. Now, let's see. Aha, he withdrew his arm quite wide that time for that cut. Maybe I can go to the head. No, he beat me to it that time. Let me feel him out a little longer first. He looks awfully wide to me on the chest. Let's see. He's faster than I think he is. Now, let's try that again. He anticipates too much. I think I can get him next time. Well, you see, maybe that will give you some idea of what a tremendous thing it is to face a great fencing master like Giorgio Santelli. Now, Giorgio is going to fence a regular bout with our national saber champion, George Worth. And perhaps they'll put together for you some of the things we've been talking about. Oh, nice one. Oh, that's just cut by Mr. Santelli. Oh, nice touch by Mr. Worth to the flank. Mr. Santelli parried and reposted to the chest. Nice touch to the head. Now that's real defense. Oh, a touch to the flank. Oh, Mr. Worth hits on the chest. Oh, parry and a repose by Mr. Santelli. Oh, that was a nice one, wasn't it? Parry to the... and a cut to the flank by Mr. Santelli. Well, you've seen some of our Olympic teams. But this wonderful sport is for men and women of any age. It develops reflexes and a sense of balance and poise. You know, the equipment doesn't cost very much. And there are clubs and YMCAs where you can get instruction anywhere in the country. As you see, we've managed to eliminate the blood, but we've retained that tremendous thrill of personal combat with a steel weapon. And don't let anybody kid you. In the heat of a modern bout, most fencers like to imagine that cut they make and that thrust is made with a lethal, sharp, pointed sword.